In 1923, a family portrait was taken in rural Pennsylvania that would haunt genealogists for over a century, featuring a man who had been buried 3 months before the photograph was developed. Before we begin this chilling journey into the archives of the impossible, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You're going to want to be here for every story we uncover. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore had spent 17 years cataloging photographic collections for the Pennsylvania Historical Society when she first encountered the Hartwell family portrait in the spring of 2019. The photograph had arrived as part of a larger estate donation from the descendants of the Hartwell farming family, along with detailed genealogical records, property deeds, and correspondence dating back to 1887. What should have been a routine archival process would become an obsession that would fundamentally challenge her understanding of documented history. The photograph itself appeared unremarkable at first glance. 7 individuals posed formally on the front porch of a modest farmhouse, their faces bearing the stern expressions typical of early 20th century portraiture. The family patriarch, Thomas Hartwell, stood at the center, flanked by his wife Margaret and their 5 children, ranging in age from 6 to 19. According to the accompanying documentation, the photograph had been taken on August 15, 1923, by a traveling photographer named Samuel Krensky, who had been making his rounds through the rural communities of Lancaster County. Dr. Whitmore methodically cross-referenced the photograph with the genealogical records provided by the family. Thomas Hartwell, born 1871, married to Margaret Brennan in 1898. Their children: Robert, born 1904, Mary, born 1906, James, born 1909, Catherine, born 1912, and young William, born 1917. Each face in the photograph corresponded perfectly to the family tree, and the documentation appeared comprehensive and authentic. It was only when she began the high-resolution digitization process that the anomaly revealed itself. Modern scanning technology can capture details invisible to the naked eye, revealing textures, shadows, and imperfections that photographers from a century ago never intended to preserve. As the scanner moved methodically across the surface of the photograph, Dr. Whitmore noticed something that made her pause mid-process. Standing slightly behind and to the left of Thomas Hartwell was another figure, partially obscured by shadows but clearly present in the composition. This 8th person had not been mentioned in any of the accompanying documentation. The figure appeared to be a man of middle age, dressed in a dark suit, consistent with the period. His face was turned slightly away from the camera, making identification difficult, but his posture and positioning suggested he was deliberately included in the family portrait. Dr. Whitmore examined the original photograph under magnification, confirming that this was not a photographic artifact or double exposure. The man was undeniably there, captured in the same moment as the rest of the Hartwell family. She immediately began searching through the genealogical records for any mention of relatives, hired hands, or family friends who might have been present during the photograph session. The Hartwell family correspondence from 1923 made no reference to house guests or extended family visits during the summer months. Property records showed no evidence of additional residents or workers on the farm during this period. The mystery deepened when Dr. Whitmore consulted with forensic photograph analyst Marcus Chen, whose expertise in historical image authentication had been crucial in several high-profile archival investigations. Chen's preliminary examination confirmed that the photograph showed no signs of manipulation or composite construction. All 8 figures appeared to have been photographed simultaneously under identical lighting conditions. The shadows are consistent, Chen explained during their initial consultation. The grain structure is uniform across the entire image. If someone had attempted to add this figure through darkroom techniques available in 1923, we would see evidence of the manipulation. This man was physically present when the photograph was taken. Dr. Whitmore's investigation expanded to include newspaper archives from Lancaster County during the summer of 1923. The local weekly, the Lancaster Farming Gazette, had covered community events, births, deaths, and social gatherings with meticulous detail. She found several mentions of the Hartwell family during this period, a brief notice about their successful wheat harvest, Margaret Hartwell's participation in the county fair preservation competition, and young Robert Hartwell's enlistment in an agricultural youth program. None of these articles mentioned any visitors or additional family members. The breakthrough came when Dr. Whitmore discovered a discrepancy in the death records archived at the county courthouse. While searching for any deceased Hartwell relatives who might have been commemorated in the family portrait, she found the death certificate for Margaret Hartwell's brother, Patrick Brennan, dated May 12, 1923. Patrick Brennan had died 3 months before the family photograph was taken. The death certificate, signed by Dr. Howard Mills and witnessed by 2 county officials, listed the cause of death as pneumonia complications. Patrick Brennan, age 38, unmarried, had been a frequent visitor to the Hartwell farm according to correspondence found in the family papers. Margaret had written to her sister in Philadelphia describing Patrick's declining health during the harsh winter of 1922-1923, expressing her concern about his persistent cough and declining appetite. A subsequent letter dated May 20, 1923, confirmed Patrick's death and described the funeral service held at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Lancaster. Margaret wrote with obvious grief about losing her dear brother, who had been such a help during the difficult seasons. Dr. Whitmore returned to the high-resolution scan of the family photograph with renewed focus. Using advanced image enhancement software, she was able to clarify the features of the mysterious eighth figure. The resemblance to Margaret Hartwell was unmistakable: the same angular jawline, the same deep-set eyes, the same distinctive nose that appeared in several other family photographs. The man in the 1923 family portrait was Patrick Brennan. She verified this identification by locating Patrick's military service photograph from 1917, when he had briefly enlisted before being discharged due to respiratory problems that would eventually contribute to his death. The facial features, even accounting for the 6-year age difference and the formal posing requirements of family portraiture, were identical. Patrick Brennan appeared in a family photograph taken 3 months after his documented death and burial. Dr. Whitmore's investigation now focused on understanding how such an impossibility could be documented in official records. She traveled to Lancaster County to examine the original death certificate and burial records at St. Mary's Catholic Church. The documentation appeared authentic and comprehensive. Dr. Mills' signature was consistent with other death certificates he had signed during the same period. The church record showed Patrick Brennan buried in plot 47B in the cemetery behind the church on May 15, 1923. The cemetery records were particularly detailed. Patrick had been buried in a simple pine coffin, with the funeral expenses paid by Thomas and Margaret Hartwell. The grave had been dug by the church sexton, Martin O'Reilly, and the burial witnessed by 12 members of the community. Father Daniel McCarthy had performed the funeral mass and recorded the burial in the official church ledger. Every aspect of Patrick Brennan's death and burial was thoroughly documented by multiple independent sources. Dr. Whitmore arranged to meet with Father Thomas Sullivan, the current pastor at St. Mary's Catholic Church, to examine the original 1923 burial records. Father Sullivan, intrigued by the historical mystery, provided access to the church's archives and accompanied Dr. Whitmore to the cemetery to locate Patrick Brennan's grave. Plot 47B was marked with a simple granite headstone bearing Patrick's name, birth date, and death date, May 12, 1923. The headstone showed nearly a century of weathering, and the surrounding graves from the same period displayed similar aging patterns. There was no evidence that the grave had been disturbed or that the burial had been anything other than a standard interment. "I've been the pastor here for 15 years, Father Sullivan explained as they stood beside the grave. "I've never encountered any irregularities in our historical records. The church has maintained meticulous documentation since its founding in 1847. If Patrick Brennan was buried here in May 1923, then he was certainly deceased at that time." The contradiction between documented death and photographic evidence seemed impossible to resolve through conventional historical analysis. Dr. Whitmore's investigation expanded to include the photographer, Samuel Krensky, whose studio records might provide additional context for the mysterious family portrait. Krensky had operated a traveling photography business throughout Lancaster County from 1919 to 1931, specializing in family portraits and community events. His business records, preserved by his descendants and donated to the County Historical Society, included detailed logs of his photography sessions. The entry for August 15, 1923, confirmed the Hartwell family portrait session. Krensky's notes described photographing the Thomas Hartwell family of 7, plus one additional male relative at their farm residence. The session had taken place in the late afternoon, with optimal lighting conditions. Krensky had charged his standard rate for group portraits, $3.50. The photographer's records clearly indicated that 8 people had been present during the session. Krensky's notes included a brief description of the photography session that proved particularly unsettling. He wrote, "The additional family member remained very still throughout the session, which was helpful given the long exposure time required. He spoke very little and seemed somewhat withdrawn, but this is not unusual for relatives visiting from a distance." Dr. Whitmore located Krensky's equipment logs from 1923, which detailed the technical specifications of each photography session. The Hartwell family portrait had required a 4-second exposure using Krensky's large format camera, with all subjects instructed to remain motionless to prevent blurring. The photographer noted that the session had proceeded smoothly, with no technical difficulties or need for retakes. All 8 subjects maintained excellent composure during the exposure, Krensky had written. The resulting image should be of high quality. The photographer's matter-of-fact documentation of photographing a dead man suggested that Patrick Brennan's presence had appeared completely normal during the session. Dr. Whitmore's research took on an increasingly urgent quality as she began experiencing unsettling dreams related to the case. The dreams invariably featured the Hartwell farmhouse, with herself standing in the position where Samuel Krensky had set up his camera in 1923. In these dreams, she could see the family assembled on the porch, but Patrick Brennan's figure appeared unstable, sometimes visible and sometimes absent, as if his presence in the photograph existed in a state of constant flux. The breakthrough in understanding the nature of the mystery came when Dr. Whitmore discovered a cache of personal letters hidden beneath loose floorboards in the Hartwell farmhouse, which was being renovated by the current owners. The letters, written by Margaret Hartwell during the months following Patrick's death, revealed a family secret that had been deliberately concealed from official records. Margaret's private correspondence described a series of disturbing events that had begun occurring shortly after Patrick's funeral. Family members reported seeing him walking around the property at dusk, tending to farm work as he had done while alive. These sightings were initially dismissed as grief-induced hallucinations, but they continued with increasing frequency throughout the summer of 1923. In a letter dated July 30th, 1923, Margaret wrote to her sister, "Patrick continues to appear to us as real as any living person. He speaks little, but helps with the evening chores as he always did. The children have grown accustomed to his presence, though young William still becomes frightened when Patrick appears in his bedroom at night. Thomas believes we should consult with Father McCarthy about this situation, but I fear the church would not understand." The letter continued, "We have decided to include Patrick in our family portrait next week, as he has requested. He says he wants to be remembered with us, and it seems cruel to deny him this simple wish. Samuel Krensky need not know the circumstances of Patrick's presence. To the photographer, he will appear as any other family member." Margaret's letters revealed that the Hartwell family had been experiencing sustained contact with Patrick Brennan's spirit throughout the summer following his death. The subsequent letters described the family's growing anxiety about Patrick's increasingly frequent appearances. By early September 1923, he was manifesting daily, often appearing in multiple locations on the property simultaneously. The family's initial comfort with his presence had transformed into fear as his behavior became more erratic and demanding. "Patrick now insists that he never died," Margaret wrote on September 15th. "He becomes angry when we mention his funeral or his grave. He claims that we are trying to convince him of something that is not true. His presence has become oppressive, and we are considering leaving the farm temporarily until this matter resolves itself." The final letter in the collection, dated October 2nd, 1923, described the family's decision to abandon their farm. "We can no longer remain here. Patrick's manifestations have become violent. He destroyed the kitchen table last night in a rage, claiming that we are conspiring to erase his existence. We will be staying with Thomas's brother in Philadelphia until we can determine how to address this situation. The farm will remain empty." County records confirmed that the Hartwell family had indeed abandoned their property in October 1923, selling the farm to distant relatives and relocating permanently to Philadelphia. Dr. Whitmore's investigation had uncovered a documented case of sustained post-mortem manifestation, with the 1923 family photograph serving as physical evidence of supernatural presence. During her visit to the former Hartwell property, now owned by a family named Morrison, who had purchased it from the Hartwell's relatives in 1951, Dr. Whitmore made a final, chilling discovery. While examining the exact location where Samuel Krensky had positioned his camera, she noticed that the angle and lighting conditions created a peculiar effect. When she stood in Patrick Brennan's position from the 1923 photograph, her shadow fell in a pattern that seemed inconsistent with the afternoon sun's position. It was as if the shadow existed independently of the light source. She photographed herself standing in Patrick's position using a camera with technical specifications similar to Krensky's 1923 equipment. When the photographs were developed, her image appeared normal and properly lit. Patrick Brennan's ability to cast shadows while manifesting as a spirit represented a level of physical presence that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of death and continued existence. The 1923 Hartwell family portrait now resides in the Pennsylvania Historical Society's archives, catalogued as an authenticated example of supernatural photography. Dr. Whitmore's investigation had confirmed that Patrick Brennan appeared in the photograph 3 months after his documented death, burial, and funeral service attended by 12 witnesses. 3 months after completing her investigation of the Hartwell photograph, Dr. Whitmore received an anonymous package at her office. Inside was a modern digital photograph showing the interior of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Lancaster. The image appeared to have been taken during a recent evening service, with approximately 30 parishioners visible in the pews. Standing in the back row, clearly visible despite the dim lighting, was Patrick Brennan. He appeared exactly as he had in the 1923 family portrait, middle-aged, wearing a dark suit, with his face turned slightly away from the camera. The photograph was dated 3 weeks earlier, nearly a century after Patrick's death and burial in the cemetery behind the church. Dr. Whitmore contacted Father Sullivan to inquire about any unusual occurrences during recent evening services. The priest reported that several parishioners had mentioned seeing an unfamiliar man attending services over the past month. But he had assumed this was simply a new member of the congregation who preferred to worship quietly in the back of the church. He never approaches for communion or participates in the responses, Father Sullivan explained. But his presence is not disruptive, he seems to be listening intently to the service. Patrick Brennan continues to manifest in contemporary times, nearly 100 years after his documented death. The case of the 1923 Hartwell family photograph raises fundamental questions about the nature of existence that official records cannot address. If consciousness can persist beyond physical death with sufficient intensity to interact with photographic equipment and cast shadows in sunlight, then the documented boundaries between life and death represent administrative convenience rather than metaphysical reality. How many other families have experienced similar manifestations but chosen not to document them out of fear of disbelief or social stigma? How many historical anomalies remain buried in archives because professional researchers lack the tools or inclination to investigate phenomena that challenge conventional understanding? The truth is that our official records document only what we are prepared to acknowledge. The rest exists in the shadows between what we know and what we are willing to accept. Like the video and subscribe for more stories history tried to bury. There are mysteries waiting in archives around the world, documented evidence of phenomena that challenge everything we think we understand about the boundaries of human existence. If you're still watching, tell me where you're from and what time it is. Knowing that people across the globe are uncovering these buried truths together makes the investigation feel less isolating. We're all standing in that same farmhouse in 1923, trying to understand how Patrick Brennan managed to pose for a family photograph 3 months after his funeral. Some questions don't have comfortable answers, but that's what makes them worth investigating.